Today's episode is brought to you by Squarespace.
Some of the most beautiful, complicated, and interesting Rolexes in the entire world are no longer allowed to be posted on Instagram. This is bizarre news. Another chapter in a very long story of Rolex lawsuits that we'll be breaking down today. And in order to really understand what's going on here in the grand scope, we're going to go back in history a little bit, a decade ago, a little bit more, and talk about the modern history of customization in the watch industry. And Rolex is really the brand at the center of this conversation. So we'll be talking about a few brands that have customized. We're talking about Bamford, La Californienne, and we're talking about the big subject here, Artisans of Genève, and how this most recent lawsuit has pretty large implications on their business model and really answering the question, what is the pathway forward from here, right? And so much of that is informed by where does Rolex's influence and control legally end, right? And the unfortunate answer with that, as with so many, right, companies, it's, well, I guess when does their bank account run out, right? Like if someone has all of the resources in the world, when are you in the clear? So really interesting conversation. I'm wearing a really beautiful vintage Datejust. This is not a customized watch like today's conversation. We'll talk all about this watch and the history of this particular dial variation and the man it was named after at the end of this episode. As always, let's look through a historical context. Let's try to lay the foundation for this conversation so you can better understand the current place of customization and the limitations that Artisans of Genève must now operate within in respect to their marketing. Okay, let's go back 15-ish years ago. This was the beginning in modern history of customization in the watch world. Bamford, I think, was really the company that began all of this. I'm not the world's biggest Bamford fan, right? And I'll explain to you, why I like them and admire them, and I'll tell you why I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan because so many of the Bamford watches that have been released, I think, are kind of unappealing. I think they're kind of ugly. That's just what happens, I think, when a brand that offers customization services doesn't really limit their clients, right? I mean, that's just a big thing, right? Ferrari has been, has actually won many lawsuits abroad, not in America, I don't believe, but abroad, where they've sued people who have customized their watches and made them ugly because Ferrari doesn't want to be associated with ugly cars. It's really interesting. That wouldn't happen in America. That's overreach. But it is an interesting idea, right? When a brand only offers the customization service, the inevitable reality is that they're going to have ugly watches out there. And I think that's what happened with Bamford. But now let's give them their credit. Bamford was at the beginning of this customization, movement. And I love that. I love customization. I think it's great. I think that Bamford has done a great deal for the watch industry. While I don't love most of their watches, there are a couple of cool ones. And frankly, in modern history, they've produced some of their own watches under their own label, like this Mono Pusher at $3,000. And I think this is an awesome watch. I think it's funny that, the Bamford that I maybe like the most is one that is actually their own watch as opposed to a Rolex. It's kind of comical. But they did make some cool Rolexes too. But they were, I think, really, in a very real way, the founding fathers of this modern movement of customization. And for that, I give them tremendous credit. It's a great thing to do. What's so cool about customization, what Bamford was able to capture and expand upon very early in modern watch collecting history was, the sort of person that customizes their Rolex it's kind of like the answer to what do you get the guy that has everything, right? I mean, if you've got a customized Rolex, that probably means you've got a lot of other watches, right? You've already done a lot of other things. You've already played around, right? You're probably pretty rich, right? You're pretty rich and you're kind of having fun. I think that's a really neat thing. I remember being a kid and looking on Google at watch sightings on GQ, et cetera, and seeing, musicians and celebrities wearing these Rolexes on courtside at basketball games. And I would say yeah, but that's not in the Rolex catalog. What is that? And there were rumors that they were being customized by this company, Bamford. It was really, really cool. And the novelty is real. I really do like the idea. Okay. But they weren't, while they may have been the first ones, they weren't the last, and I don't think they were the best. Okay, moving on to the next company I want to talk about today is La Californienne. When I first got on the watch Instagram space around 2015, I remember very well early in those days that there was a company called La Californienne that was buying vintage Datejahs and Cartiers, particularly Cartier quartz tanks vermeil, right? These gold-plated tanks, and they were repainting their dials and adding painted straps, and they were retailing them at a premium, of course, for their services, but not a crazy premium. And what was interesting about this company was it really seemed like, they were selling something that was cool and trendy and neat, but much more akin to what you would find on like 47th Street or in any diamond or jewelry exchange. And that's not a slight to La Californienne. What I just mean is the dials were colorful and they were clearly aftermarket, whereas Bamford was producing like really crazy PVD and they were putting, different weird hands, and it just seemed like that was a larger, company with more production capabilities. La Californienne was just selling kind of, aftermarket colorful dials and secondhand and whatever. It was kind of fun. It was kind of neat. I don't know how well they did. I have no idea. But I remember looking at their brand and saying, well, it's, I could definitely see why a lot of folks, mass market, particularly women, because they were marketed toward women, would buy these watches. It's a fun Rolex, right? And a lot of people don't even have like the stigma in their mind about aftermarket. That's not even a thing to them, right? That's a thing once you get into the watch world. But La Californienne wasn't targeting deep watch people. They were targeting the masses, people that were like, yeah, it's a Rolex, and California's got good reviews, and their watches aren't fake, and the colors are cool. Sure. Then came a lawsuit. In 2019, Rolex sued La Californienne, and they won, which limited La Californienne, or actually restricted La Californienne, from selling these watches anymore because they were essentially infringing on trademark, and the Rolex called them counterfeit, basically. I think it was kind of a crappy decision. I'm not, fluent in trademark law by just any stretch of the imagination, but I think that common sense can guide us pretty far, and I don't really understand why La Californienne could not sell, Rolexes with aftermarket dials. These are common practice. I mean, I could absolutely imagine, the government, the courts, instituting or implementing or requiring like disclaimers as to not allow La Californienne to portray some sort of partnership with Rolex. I can absolutely see a world in which Rolex required, or the courts required, La Californienne to put on their website almost like a Surgeon General warning. These watches have been modified. They are not under Rolex warranty. I understand that. I think that that's within good business practice. I don't think that it would have been silly at all. Not only in the best interest of Rolex, but also the consumer, right? I could totally see, right, people that don't know much about watches believing that a customized Rolex is a, completely genuine, all original Rolex that they could bring to the Rolex store and have serviced. And I could see a world in which the courts decided, well, we need a disclaimer there to make it clear that if you bring this to the Rolex store, they will not service it, right? Because it is outside of their warranty because of the customization done by California. So I happen to think that they kind of got, the short end of the stick, probably because they didn't have unlimited resources like Rolex legally. Fine. Moving on to the third part of the story, and I think the most interesting part. Artisans of Genève. Artisans of Genève, unlike Bamford, who is kind of a more loosey-goosey customization service that just plays around with color mostly, Artisans of Genève takes a totally different approach, an elevated approach, right? Artisans of Genève doesn't look at Rolex as a canvas to color, but rather looks at a Rolex as a kind of canvas to then go and develop high horology, right? They're bringing in finishing techniques and materials and complication like this Submariner Moon phase that take a $10,000 Rolex and reimagine it at $60,000, right? What would a truly high horology, right, Rolex look like? And that's a really interesting question because it's not something we've ever seen, right? Rolex doesn't sell high horology. Rolex sells, in a nutshell, like luxurious utilitarian watches, like within relative approachability so far as luxury brands are concerned, right? Rolex is not on par with the high horology watch brands like Patek Philippe or Pigeon or Audemars Piguet. Rolex doesn't want to be that, right? And that's part of the reason why Rolex is able to sell, 1.2 million watches a year, right? Because their potential buyer pool is so much larger because of their strategic pricing. So that's what Artisans of Genève does. But if you love Rolex, but want one with no holds barred, want one that has been essentially worked on by a master watchmaker and master designers, then buy from us. If you want a Rolex Submariner that fits, much more logically into your watch box of complicated Patek Philippe's, you buy an Artisan's de Genève, right? And the lists are very long, and they're a very successful company, okay? So in 2020, Artisan's de Genève was both offering customization services as well as these watches finished in their retail shop. Rolex on the sneak bought one of these watches, and it gave way to a lawsuit that ultimately decided that Artisan's de Genève could no longer retail these watches. So it changed their business model. They could no longer retail the watches. They had to be, and exclusively, a service company, right? A company that was providing a customization service. So how does the sales journey look? An owner of a Rolex, right? Someone that had to go get it from an authorized dealer, or someone had to go get it from a gray market. So if it's a Daytona, you're either paying $15,000 or $30,000, and then you're sending it to Artisan's de Genève. And by the way, there's an extensive wait list. And then you're spending another, I don't know, $20, $30, $40, $50, $60,000, right? And probably in some cases on the customization services, and you're getting back a high horology Rolex. Hugely successful company, fantastic. But they've been sued again, and the case has just been decided. Now, part of the case has been decided in the favor of Artisan's de Genève. It's been decided that they can continue to sell these customization services, right? That Rolex has no right to stop a company from customizing any product, namely their own, right? Once you as a company sell your product, you lose the right to have a say in what that person goes and does with your product, period, end. Now, obviously, if you were an authorized dealer of Rolex and you were selling Rolexes in partnership with Rolex and under the Rolex name and guarantee, and you were customizing them, you would be doing something illegal, right? You would be breaking that agreement. And you would do something illegal. But once that watch is sold, the buyer, the retail buyer, can go do whatever the heck he wants with it, right? He can, give it to his girlfriend of 2 weeks. He can smash it with a hammer. He can paint it red. It doesn't matter, right? So fine, that's a win for Artisan's de Genève. But there was also a loss. And the court decided in the second portion, this marketing portion, that Artisan's de Genève cannot market or advertise modified products, which are their watches, with another brand's trademarks without consent. Number one, we can imagine, given that Rolex is the company that's suing Artisan's de Genève, that there will never be consent, so period. But, the next question is, well, what does, trademarks mean, right? Is it the logo? And that's it? Or does it go beyond that, right? Does it go to, other designs that have been, trademarked or patented or whatever it may be? Like, is it the oyster case? Is it the presidential bracelet? Is the oyster bracelet? All these other elements, right, that Rolex certainly has like legal ownership over. Can they? Would Artisan's de Genève be within infraction if they post a customized watch that is evidently a customized Rolex? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. That actually wasn't elaborated on, and I think that we'll probably see that chapter down the line. But let's go back to the logo portion of it. That is certainly going to be at the center of what is an infraction. The logo would be the number one, right? So I move on to two questions. Number one, if Artisan's de Genève continue to produce their watches, these absolute masterpieces, without the Rolex logo, would it make those watches any less desirable? I don't think the answer is yes. I think that people would still line up for these watches. They're strokes of brilliance. They've built a cult following. No one does this better than they do. And anyone in the know will know, without the Rolex logo, that this is an Artisan's de Genève watch. I don't even think that that's so bad of a decision for Artisan's de Genève. Now, other brands, right, will have a hard time with that because they won't be able to kind of, continue to market the Rolex brand. So I think they'd have a hard time. But Artisan's de Genève is a brand. Artisan's de Genève has this huge reputation, so I don't think it would impact them really any. I don't think that anyone would actually care. These watches speak for themselves and very loudly. Now, obviously, back to what I had mentioned just a second ago, it does make me wonder about the future, right? Is Artisan's de Genève, will they always be an enemy of Rolex, which is not a great place to be, right? Rolex has an unlimited amount of resources, certainly, in excess of Artisan's de Genève. And, I never have confidence in the little guy when it comes to legal proceedings, right? I mean, it's kind of naive too, right? If the other side just has these unlimited resources, how can a company afford to continue battling? Unless the system itself, the presiding judges, I don't know, unless they really just think that Rolex, on a PR level or whatever, is being a bad guy, how do you beat them? So that's where this conversation kind of ends, but also begins, right? Because now that so much of this structure has been laid out, there are really very few questions left, right? Back when Bamford was beginning this 10 or 15 years ago, there were all the questions in the world ahead. right? There were all the questions. We didn't know what was legal, what wasn't. California, all of these different, over the last 15 years, we've been finding out little by little. Now we know that the service is legal and the retail is not, and certain marketing is legal and certain is not. So where does it end is the question. And does Rolex ever become the bad guy? And I think the answer is probably no, right? Because Artisans of Geneva is such a small company in the grand scheme of things, and Rolex is is the largest watch brand in the world, makes up over a third of the global watch sales period, far larger than any other brand. So I don't know what'll happen. I don't know what'll happen, but I'll tell you this. I don't think that Artisans of Geneva is ever going to have a problem. They're absolutely brilliant. I would kill for Artisans of Geneva. They do an amazing job, and I think it is rare sometimes for truly great artists, be it in any space, get the credit they deserve. Artists have a very hard time succeeding, especially within their lifetime. And I'm glad to see Artisans of Geneva flourish. Now, that does not mean that I only like customized Rolexes, certainly, which brings me into the last part of this conversation, which is this amazing vintage Datejust. Let's take a quick 60 seconds and thank our sponsor, Squarespace. If it hadn't been for Squarespace, I don't think I would have successfully gotten off the ground. The infrastructure, support, and service and templates that Squarespace gave me as a young entrepreneur to build a site that, while extremely affordable, looked and functioned professionally, is something that I will never not be grateful for. I will never not be vocal about. Their collection of templates is remarkable. And now with their new Fluid Engine system, you can drag and drop and edit so quickly, right? Blogs and copy and everything. It's amazing what Squarespace is able to deliver for their clients. I've tried their competitors. Frankly, they were a disaster. Squarespace is my home, and I don't just recommend that you sign up for Squarespace if you're new to business and starting your own new company, but also if you've got a website, you've got a company, it's all going just fine. Head on over to Squarespace and poke around. Make an account. I can almost guarantee you that after just a couple of minutes on their website, your sense of the opportunities that are out there is going to be so expanded. You're going to see what Squarespace can do for you in the growth of your business. So if you'd like to head over to Squarespace, go ahead and do it now. Squarespace.com/Theo Harris will get you 10% off your first website or domain. And again, I couldn't recommend this company more. This is a reference 16030 with a D-Link Jubilee bracelet and a blue matte dial. And the dial is called a Buckley dial, which means it has these painted Roman numerals. This example has all of its original tritium plots and an engine-turned bezel. Rolex used to offer these watches with essentially 3 different sorts of bezels: engine-turned, fluted, and smooth. Engine-turned is the only sort of bezel that is no longer in production. Maybe it'll be back at some point. I don't know. But I think that this is a really interesting and very pretty piece of history. You guys know how much I love Datejust. Datejust has been, kind of the bedrock of the Theo and Harris brand for so long. It was my first vintage watch, and it's still a watch that I wear all the time and value. Oh my God, value is an understatement. These watches to me are so attractive because they capture all that is quintessential Rolex. The oyster case, Jubilee bracelet, all the, real traditional hallmarks. But they do it relatively affordably in the grand scheme of Rolex. And, the Datejust has so many, little details like other Rolex models. But once you get into little details and other Rolex models like the Submariner or the GMT or the Daytona, the premiums just become $20, $30, $50, $100,000, $1 million sometimes. It's crazy. In the Datejust, you can get an amazing example for, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10,000. I mean, if you have a Tiffany stamp, you're in the 15 or whatever, but it's still, relatively speaking, affordable, or maybe without using the term affordable because it can be a little bit of, a term that's taken out of context. It is a, fraction of the price for equally interesting detail. Right? So for me, the Datejust is such an amazing watch. This one is available in the Theo and Harris Vintage Watch Shop, along with a whole host of other vintage watches from Rolex and Tudor and Patek and Cartier. So head on over, take a look. If you're not looking for a watch right now, take a look at the strap shop as well. We've got some amazing, beautiful straps in there, from calf and suede to exotic leathers. I pick out all those straps myself and order them myself, and they're from United States, Italy, and France. So go take a look. I hope to see you all very soon, and thank you for listening to this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it.